Robert E. Lee and Abraham Lincoln are probably the two main figures of the Civil War. However, there's been a lot of memes across social media which has supported misinformation, calling Lincoln a supporter of slavery and declaring Robert E. Lee as a staunch abolitionist. I'm here to debunk these myths. The first meme comes from two contrasting quotes with Abraham Lincoln and General Lee. In Lincoln's quote, it says, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it." Then you see General Lee's quote, which starts out by saying, "There is a terrible war coming, and these young men who have never seen war cannot wait for it to happen. But I tell you, I wish I owned every slave in the South, for I would free them all to avoid this war." The second meme that I'm going to share is the one that shows the actual Confederate flag and declares, "This is the flag of the Confederate States of America. This flag was flown by 4 states that included slavery in their letters of succession, as well as 7 who did not. This is the battle flag in Northern Virginia. This flag flew over the army led by a staunch abolitionist who fought for states' right of sovereignty, a state that had no mention of slavery as a reason to secede from the Union." Obviously, both of these memes are incredibly inaccurate, but let's start with the claims that Abraham Lincoln was a supporter of slavery. The first thing that should be stated is Lincoln was not an abolitionist, yet he still believed that slavery was morally wrong. In a speech in 1854, Lincoln declared his opposition to slavery, but he admitted that he did not know what to do inside the United States' current system. Contrast this to abolitionists who believe that all slaves should be freed and should be immediately incorporated into American society. In fact, during Lincoln's administration, he was constantly at odds with radical Republicans who believed Lincoln wasn't doing enough about the slavery question. Though the 13th Amendment was an excellent step, Lincoln only believed in the emancipation of slaves and did not believe that they could be equal members of society. In 1858, with his debates against Stephen Douglas, Lincoln declared, "I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races." Lincoln went on to say that he did not believe blacks should have the right to vote, intermarry, or serve on juries. It should also be noted that Lincoln said these things when campaigning for office, meaning he could have been making himself more electable for a wide variety of people. We need to keep in mind what was politically normal in the 19th century would not be the same as now, and a majority of the electorate, especially in Illinois, were full of white supremacists. Illinois was a hotly contested Senate race. Lincoln would be doomed by declaring that he believed in full rights for blacks. The same can be true for Lincoln's quote about preserving the Union. In the 1860 election, Lincoln could not declare that he wanted the slaves emancipated, as it would ostracize Southern voters and ensure civil war. In fact, before the Emancipation Proclamation, the war was certainly about preserving the Union and not about slavery. But as soon as he gave that speech, the war's reason completely changed. Now, lost causers will say that Lincoln was terrible because the Emancipation Proclamation did not free any slaves, which is true. But Lincoln had to do this to preserve the border states like Kentucky and Maryland, to make sure they had no reason to secede from the Union. Now that Lincoln's beliefs have been established, what exactly did he want to do with the freed slaves? Well, unfortunately, Lincoln's resolution to slavery was by colonization. Lincoln was of the mindset that the blacks could never truly be free within American society, and instead they should immigrate to Africa or Central America. In 1854, in a speech, Lincoln declared that he wanted to free all the slaves and send them to Liberia. The reason for Liberia is because of the American Colonization Society, who frankly deserve a video of their own. Moreover, in 1862, Lincoln hosted a delegation of freed blacks to the White House to gain their support for a proposed colonization of Central America. According to the reports, Lincoln argued, and I quote, "It would be better for both of us, therefore, to be separated." As shown above, Lincoln clearly had his flaws and would probably be considered a white supremacist by today's standards. However, we need to keep in mind the time period Lincoln was in, and we also need to realize the crucial steps Lincoln took towards equality. Despite what we want to believe, equality is not a one-step game. You need to take gradual, slow steps to eventually arrive at your goal. And I believe Lincoln knew this. If he declared himself a staunch abolitionist, Lincoln would never have become president. The difference between Lincoln and a radical such as John Brown is Lincoln had the ability to make calculated political decisions to get what he wanted. Now, this will lead me to Robert E. Lee, who Lost Causers have said is a staunch abolitionist, a claim that cannot be further from the truth. Before diving into Lee, I want to address the claim that only 4 Southern states mention slavery and their reasons for secession, which is completely untrue. I read through every state's letter of secession, and every state mentioned slavery in their letter, including Virginia. In Virginia's Ordinance of Secession, it states, "And the federal government having perverted said powers not only to the injury of the people of Virginia, but to the oppression of the southern slaveholding states." So yes, every southern state succeeded because of slavery. It was not the only reason for secession, but it was definitely present in every secession ordinance. Now, for Robert E. Lee. For some reason, there is this perception from the Lost Cause that Robert E. Lee was a civil rights hero, and that he was a staunch abolitionist. And I've kind of understand where this is coming from. Growing up in the South, I sort of idolized Lee as the primary example of a Southern gentleman. So needless to say, it's hard for us to accept how much of a monster he really was. A common misconception about Lee is he wanted emancipation for the slaves, which could not be further from the truth. In a letter Lee once wrote, it states, "The blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. The painful discipline they are undergoing is necessary for their instruction as a race, and I hope will prepare and lead them to better things. How long their subjugation may be necessary is known and ordered by a wise, merciful providence." Wow. And it does not end there. After the death of Lee's father-in-law, George Washington Custis, he designated Lee as the heir to his estate. Within Custis's will, it said that his slaves were to be emancipated by my executors in such manner as to my executors may seem most expedient and proper. The will went on to say that the time in between freedom should not exceed 5 years. So now, Lost Causers, what did the staunch abolitionist Robert E. Lee do with his slaves he was supposed to free? Well, he didn't free them. In fact, he made their lives worse. In a letter from 1859, it was stated that Lee's slaves were harder at work than ever, and how they were not given any time for themselves. In fact, Lee even complained to a friend how slaves were not following his orders, because they believed Custis freed them. 3 slaves even tried to emancipate themselves, and were promptly arrested and whipped for their disobedience. But perhaps this was young Lee, and during the Civil War he saw the error of his ways, and did not participate in slavery during the Civil War, even though he was trying to fight to preserve it. Well, unfortunately to you Lost Causers, this is again a falsehood. During the Civil War, Lee kept 2 personal slaves to attend to his needs during the war. Moreover, Lee also urged governors to send slaves to help with manual labor. Worse yet, throughout his military campaigns, Lee's men would round up freed blacks and would sell them into slavery. And before you ask, yes, I blame Lee for this, since as the leader, he is responsible for those men's actions. To Lee's credit, though, he did have somewhat of a weird progressive side to his campaign. In October of 1864, Lee recommended that African Americans should be allowed to enlist in the Confederate Army, with freedom to those who joined immediately, and after a faithful service, their families would be provided emancipation. I'm under the opinion, though, that Lee didn't do this for the love of the blacks. Instead, he did this out of desperation. Keep in mind, this statement was made in 1864, when the tides of the war have completely shifted to the Union's favor. In fact, Lee stated that slavery shall be extinguished by our enemies, and that slaves used against us, or use them ourselves, at the risk of the effects which may be produced upon our social institution. This shows that Lee believed that freedom for the blacks would risk Southern society, but he believed that this could be the only path towards victory. After the war, many Lost Causers believed Lee was an advocate for civil rights. According to accounts in his time at Washington College, Lee made sure white students did not harass neighboring black churches, even expelling one student involved in a harassment incident. What they fail to mention, though, is how Lee, on multiple occasions, refused to educate blacks at Washington College, and how Lee stated that blacks were, quote unquote, not as capable of acquiring knowledge as the white man is. Lee also helped ensure that the Virginia Constitution remained segregated. During Reconstruction, Lee stated that he opposed any system of laws which would place the political power of the country in the hands of the Negro race, because the Negroes have neither the intelligence nor the qualifications which are necessary to make them safe depositories of political power. So was Lee an abolitionist and civil rights hero? Absolutely not. But there was a complexity to the man. Obviously, Lee was not a huge fan of chattel slavery, but he also tolerated it. He still believed blacks were inferior to whites, and therefore deserved their lot in life. This just goes to show how history is not just black and white. There's not just good and evil. There are complexities to every historical figure, as you just saw today. Abraham Lincoln is not flawed, and certainly Robert E. Lee is not flawed. I implore you to do more research when you look at these historical figures. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you want more Civil War videos, remember to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel and motivates me to make more videos. I thought this was a fun thing to do, and I love debunking dumb memes as well. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.